we're delighted to have you, Ginger. This is really great. I was introduced to you by an article in the Providence Journal shortly after your book
Right.
was uh, printed uh, with the help of the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, this huge project that you've been undertaking for so many years. And when I first spoke with Ginger, I was telling her that in 2018, we had an annual meeting speaker, Todd McLeish, and he was talking about a variety of endangered or threatened species in New England, and he mentioned the ringed bog haunter, which is a kind of dragonfly that is uncommon. And Ginger informed me that, I guess, if this is correct, if I remember, Ginger, that it's threatened, it's on the threatened species list in Rhode Island. It's not federally
Right.
listed, but it is state listed as a threatened species. And
Yeah,
we
it's actually
happened,
state listed as an endangered species, so it's even a
oh,
category.
endangered. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and we had, Todd knew that we had just recently acquired a bog. So, and that name just, ringed bog haunter just sounded so terrific. I kept hoping that we could have some opportunity to learn more about it and maybe find out whether, in fact, the bog that we preserved with the Agricultural Conservancy Trust here in Little Compton actually has some resident bog haunters on it.
Yeah.
But Ginger is the person that you came to listen to. And as Joy has said, she's willing to take questions during the chat. During the her presentation, if you put them in the chat option, we'll take notice of that and direct them to her. She'll also take questions after her presentation. So Ginger, it's your
Thank you.
turn.
Thanks so much. I want to thank the Sakonnet Preservation Association for having me this evening. Um, okay, there's something in the middle of my screen. And I want to thank everyone who's tuned in. I'm excited to be here and talking about dragonflies. This is the time of year when I start thinking about dragonflies, and because I know that next month we're going to start seeing a few species out. Um, I also wanted just to shout out here before I start. I want to make a shout out and acknowledge the work that the Sakonnet Preservation Association and other local land trusts and nonprofits and state and federal agencies have done and are doing to protect habitat for dragonflies and damselflies and many other wetlands and terrestrial species. Without your work, we would have no chance at all to protect these wonderful animals that I'm going to tell you about this evening. So shout out to all the conservation agencies, my appreciation and all the appreciation of all the dragonflies, appreciate your work as well. So I'm going to share a screen here and we'll jump right in. Give me just a second. It is not wanting to come up. Yep, I'm having some, oh, there we go. Okay, my computer's a little slow. I apologize for that. So as I said, this time of year, I start thinking about dragonflies and damselflies because they're going to start flying in the end of April. Dragonflies and damselflies belong to the insect order Odonata. If you hear me say the word odonate, it is just a more convenient way to say dragonflies and damselflies, which is a mouthful, without actually having to say dragonflies and damselflies. So on we go. You might ask, why dragonflies and damselflies? Well, it's just this entire dragonfly package of amazing color and personality and significance in nature. And we're going to go through, I'm going to talk to you about natural history, behavior, habitat, conservation, ecology, all those good things, and all kinds of fun stuff tonight, and show you some pictures of some really incredible insects. Get you excited about what's coming up in the next several months. I am fascinated by dragonflies and damselflies because of their color, because their behaviors. They're voracious predators, and you can see their entire adult life unfold before you at pretty much any pond or wetland. They are also super important in the web of life in nature, and we'll get into that in more detail. The other thing is they're ancient insects, and their fossils go back in the fossil record to 300 million years. And if you think about that, that means that dragonflies and damselflies basically witnessed both the evolution and the extinction of other animal groups, including all of the dinosaurs, and they remain relatively unchanged over the millennia. The thing about the older species in the fossil record is they were quite a bit larger than our dragonflies today, and some of them were the size of crows. I'm not sure I would want to go chasing after one of those with an insect net if it was the size of a crow, but so those are some of the reasons that I find them fascinating. And even after nearly 40 years of studying them, I still learn more from them and find them endlessly fascinating. Let's look at the insect on the screen in front of you. This is a typical dragonfly. And dragonflies, when they perch, they hold their wings out flat like an airplane. And remember that, because I'm going to come back to that when we start talking about damselflies. This is a typical insect. You'll see the three body parts, the head, the thorax. I'll just point these out, the head, the thorax, and then in dragonflies and damselflies, this very elongate abdomen. The thorax is where the four wings and the six legs are anchored. The head in dragonflies and damselflies is made up almost entirely of compound eyes. In compound eyes, insects have compound eyes, and that really just means that each eye has multiple facets in it or multiple lenses. Some of our larger dragonflies may have as many as 20,000 or more lenses in each eye. The more lenses they have, the better their vision. I'm certainly glad nobody assigned me the task of having to count all those lenses in a dragonfly eye, but the number of lenses does tell you how good their vision is. And you can also notice that this dragonfly has very small antennae. The antennae are hardly visible. So enlarged eyes and reduced antennae tells you that they navigate through life largely through vision in perceiving the environment around them. You'll also notice that the wings are really heavily veined, lots and lots of wing veins in there. And those give the dragonfly and damselfly stability in flight. And they are legendary in flight. Dragonflies can fly at 30 miles an hour or more for short bursts. They can stop and hover like a miniature helicopter, do backflips and somersaults, and fly sideways and upside down if necessary. So their flight abilities are really amazing. And if you try to catch one in a net, you'll know what I'm talking about. They are truly amazing on the wing. So I always like to say that common green darner in the upper left-hand corner there is the last thing that millions of mosquitoes see in their life. These are, like I said, voracious predators in both the larval stage and the adult stage, and they are well equipped to catch other flying insects, and they do so and catch their food and consume it primarily on the wing. Again, you can see the enormous eyes in that common green darner that touch on top of the head, a little seam there on top of the head. Let's see if I can point this out right there. So that almost the entire head is made up of a helmet of eyes. In the upper right is a comet darner. And again, you can see a streamlined aerodynamic form of these insects with a very elongate abdomen. When they catch their prey, they are able to hold their prey in this sort of basket of legs here, these six legs. And on the left, lower left, is a swamp darner that I caught in Massachusetts. It was feeding in a swarm of other insects. I mean, everything was in this swarm: flies, grasshoppers, bees, beetles. And when I caught it and looked at it close up, and I'm going to switch and show you it close up, I noticed that it had little bits and pieces of all its meals stuck on its body. So little crumbs. It had a grasshopper leg on one side and a fly wing on the other. And here's that fly wing stuck right here. So you can imagine this dragonfly making contact with its prey and just devouring the prey, and wings and legs flying everywhere. You'll also notice that the legs are armed with spines, and dragonflies and damselflies have spiny legs, and there's a reason for that. And that is that they're able to hold their prey. Once they've caught their prey, the prey cannot escape from the basket of spiny legs. So this is a damselfly, and dragons and damsels, as I said, are in the same insect order, so they're closely related. You'll notice how the damselfly holds its wings folded up over its back. It's much different resting pattern than dragonflies. You can see a little bit of fuzz on the thorax of this damselfly, and a lot of dragons and damsels do actually have hair on them. In damselflies, they're generally smaller than dragonflies, and they're much more slender. Their abdomen is more slender. Their eyes are also separated on the top of their head rather than coming together in a seam like I pointed out in the earlier photo of the dragonfly. Now, we're all pretty much familiar with dragonflies and damselflies as adults. We see them flying around when we're canoeing or fishing, but most people don't and haven't seen the larval stage. Dragonflies are aquatic insects, and as such, their larvae live in the water. The eggs are either laid in the water or laid inside of a plant stem just above the water, and that in that case, rising water levels will flood those eggs out. But the larva is the longest stage of the dragonfly and damselfly life. The adult life is only a few weeks in time, but the larva will live for as many as a period of several months to several years in the water. And so this is a very important habitat. They are aquatic insects for most of their life, and it's important to point that out. And because of that, odonates, dragonflies and damselflies, are excellent indicators of environmental health, because many species require good conditions in the water and good conditions in the landscape surrounding the water. This is a typical insect. Again, you can see the three body parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. It's a squat little critter, and they hang out in the jungles of emergent vegetation, or they burrow into the soil, the sediment, or the sand in search of prey. They are voracious predators in and of themselves, and they feed on any number of things under the water, including lots and lots of mosquito larvae. But they eat other insects, including other dragonflies or damselflies. They eat, as I said, mosquitoes. They eat tadpoles and small fish. So again, they are extremely beneficial, as are the adults, as insect-eating critters that also eat insects that we may not want to have around. I do say they are generalists, so they don't just pick the ones that we don't like. They eat just about anything that they can find. And one of the couple things I want to point out about this ring boghunter larva is these structures right here. These are the wing pads, and they will, when the larva emerges, the wings of the adult will come out of those and expand and carry the adult through its entire life. The nymph of dragonflies have just an extraordinary lower lip, and that might sound kind of weird, but it's a hinge structure that is normally stowed underneath the head of the dragonfly, and on the end of it has pincers, and they lie in wait, and when something tasty gets close enough, that lower lip just shoots out with lightning speed, and they are able to grab their prey and consume it. So this is the larval stage, and again, they are aquatic, and that's important to remember. At some point in the larva's life, and we call odonate larvae nymphs. The aquatic larvae are also often called nymphs. And when the larva has finished growing, and all they do as larvae is eat and grow and molt, eat and grow and molt, because once they emerge, there's no more growth. The adult insect does not grow at all. It eats, but it doesn't grow. So again, depending on ambient conditions, day length, insect hormones, and weather conditions, at some point the nymph is going to crawl out of the water. It might crawl up on a plant stem. It might crawl up the bank of the pond or lake or river. It might crawl up on a bridge abutment to emerge. It might crawl up the trunk of a tree and out onto a branch to emerge. And some of them may travel more than 100 feet from the water. As you can imagine, this is a very vulnerable time because the new adult that's coming out cannot fly, and it's all soft-bodied, so it's certainly vulnerable to all kinds of issues. Here you can see the new adult that's backing out. This is the larval shell. You can see its legs holding on for dear life to this emergent support. And then the adult is backing out. Here's the head of the new adult. Here are its legs, and the wings are somewhere in here. And it's going to come out backwards and then swing forward and grab onto that support. And again, it's a vulnerable time, and almost anything can happen as these guys are emerging and right after they emerge. This is a ring boghunter nymph that I encountered in a bog in West Greenwich. And it had been engulfed in ants as it was attempting to emerge from the larval stage. So that's just one predator that may find its way to an emerging odonate. And once the odonate has finished, the adult has finished emerging, it's called a teneral. And that is not a fully mature adult yet. Its body is still kind of soft, and its wings, you can see the veins in the wings are not darkened yet, and the wings have kind of a sheen to them. and the body colors have not matured yet as well. And so it's going to need some time before it expands from that larval stage. The larva of an adult dragonfly is about 1/2 or less of the size of the adult. So the adult body is all crumpled up in there as it emerges, and it needs to pump body fluids into all the body parts before it can expand and become a full adult. And as I said, there's all kinds of hazards during emergence. Anybody guess what happened here? On the left, you'll see a dragon hunter that has just emerged, and that is teneral. It cannot fly yet. And on the right, you'll see that same dragon hunter and a catbird that is getting ready to dine on that newly emerged dragon hunter for lunch. So birds are great predators on dragonflies and damselflies. They love to feed their babies dragonflies, and they love to eat them themselves. I have found in birds as small as purple martins in their nests, I have found dead dragonflies. In fact, in one ward in Warren, I found a dead swamp darner, which is the largest dragonfly in North America. Seriously, it's the size almost of a small bird. All I can think of is the parent caught it and dragged that in, and it was just too big to shove down the throat of one of the babies. I was amazed to find it in there, but this is a phoebe with a prince basket tail. So birds eat dragonflies. Just about everything eats odonates. Birds, small mammals, fish. I've seen fish leap out of the pond water to catch an adult dragonfly that's flying overhead. And even carnivorous plants will dine on odonates. The slower flying damselflies are more likely to get caught by a carnivorous plant. So once the adult is gone, it leaves behind its larval shell, and that's called an exuvia that you see here. This is a ring bog haunter exuvia. And the exuvia is an exact replica of the larva. And so in most species, you can identify that larval shell or exuvia to species. In some, it's really tricky, but if you get to know the larva well enough, in most species, you can do this. And it turns out that walking around on a shoreline or in a wetland and counting these emerged dragonfly or damselfly larval shells is a good way to measure a population, to figure out how many individuals occur in that population. And that has been used with great success with putting population sizes on ring bog haunter populations and with river dragonflies that are rare as well, where you don't necessarily see the adults, because the adults, when they leave, they fly into the forest and are very difficult to find. And just to give you an example, with the ring bog haunter, I have counted well over 1,300 exuvia in the wetland in a period of a couple of hours. But in a period of a couple of hours searching for the adults, I have seen no more than 10 or 12 at a time. So you have much more accurate population information if you look for these exuvia in the wetlands. And here's the ring bog haunter in its all full adult glory with the hardened wings and darkened veins. And you can see the eyes have changed color, and the colors on the abdomen are much more developed and brighter. All right, so the adult life, as I said, is very short. And most insects, the real purpose of the adult life, the adult stage, is to reproduce. And in dragons and damsels, mating takes an interesting form. And here you can see a pair of meadowhawks that are mating. And the males in odonates, both dragonflies and damselflies, they have claspers on the end of their abdomen. And in damselflies, they're really small and really hard to see, but they are located right at the end, and they hold on in mating. They hold on to the female behind the head. And it turns out that the shape of those male appendages fit precisely like a lock and key into grooves behind the female's head. So that mechanism is so that if a male attempts to mate with the wrong female or a female of a different species, it's just not going to work, right? Because those claspers on the male abdomen will not fit into the grooves behind the female's head. So in damselflies, here you can see mating pair of damselflies. These are bluets, one of the largest groups of damselflies that we have in Rhode Island. And you can see it kind of looks like a sideways or upside down heart. But the same thing is true in that the male claspers are holding the female behind the head. Now in damselflies, the males have 4 appendages at the end of their abdomen. And in dragonflies, they have just 3. With damselflies, because they're so small, you can catch them in a net and have them in your hand, and you still may not be able to tell what species they are. You might have to magnify those appendages on the end of the male abdomen. So after mating is finished, it gets even more interesting because the males often stay with the females and retain a hold on them. You can see those claspers holding the female behind the head until the female has successfully laid her eggs. Because in odonates, the last male that mates with the female is the one that's going to fertilize her eggs. And so this behavior on the part of males is called contact guarding. In other words, he keeps a physical contact with the female. Other forms of guarding are not physical, and the male will hover nearby and wait for another male to intrude in his territory and then chase him away. And dragonflies are territorial, and they will get quite mean with each other and quite aggressive with each other. If a male ventures into another male's territory, that male will chase that dragonfly away, and you get aerial scuffles of contact between males. It's really amazing what you can see in life around a pond. Now here's a female darner ovipositing, and the darner family and all of the damselflies, they put their eggs inside of plant tissue. So this one is slicing little holes in the stem of a rush that's emergent from a pond. Here you can see where she has been, these little openings in the plant stem, and here she's slicing into the plant and depositing eggs in there. Other dragonflies will dip the end of their abdomen, the females will dip the end of their abdomen in the water to wash eggs off, or they'll probe their abdomen into the substrate on the bottom of a stream to release eggs, and those eggs then will live in the water for a couple of weeks. In the case of dragonflies and damsels that are laying their eggs above the water level, in the fall, the water level will come up, it will rise, it will flood those eggs out, and they'll drop into the water and develop further. So just like birds, male dragonflies and damselflies are more colorful than females. And that's because, as I said, there's a lot of stuff going on around ponds during mating time. And males chase females and they get harassed. So just like birds, the male dragonflies and damselflies are much more colorful than the females. And in these calico pennants here, you can see the male is bright red, and where the male is bright red, the female is a yellow in color. All right, so dragonfly flight is also very interesting and different from more evolutionarily advanced insects, because when a dragonfly flies, when the front wings are on the upswing, the hind wings are on the downswing. And what that's doing is it's generating little mini tornadoes around the tips of their wings, and they're able to harvest that turbulence, and it aids them in speed and in maneuverability on the wing. Because of their reliance on flight, everything they do as an adult happens on the wing. Their legs are actually oriented down and forward on their body, you can see here, and that facilitates perching, but not walking. So an adult odonate cannot actually walk. They can perch and they can get up off that perch quickly because of the way the legs are oriented, but they cannot walk. Now, dragons and damsels are easily handled, unlike butterflies and moths, which are more fragile. You can easily handle dragonflies without harming them, as long as you don't catch a tenorel that has just emerged from the water. This common green darner here, it shows you, one, how large it is compared to the hand of that person, and two, how it's pretty rugged and sturdy, and it's usually not possible to damage these in handling them, but you do have to avoid the tenorel individuals. I put this in here because common green darners are one of our most common migratory dragonfly. We do have migrating dragonflies in our area on the New England coast and Northeast coast. And between the middle of August and the end of September, you can see huge numbers of migrating common green darners heading south along our coast. And Little Compton is a great place. Go to a beach after a storm has passed in August or September and wait. And you will see potentially large numbers in the thousands of these dragonflies going by. Dragonfly migration is not well understood. One thing we do know is that it's not a two-way migration like birds. That would be a lot to ask of an insect to fly two ways. And we know they fly several hundred miles to the southern United States. Along the way, the females will actually lay their eggs. And the next season, the progeny of those southbound females will actually fly north. That's mind-boggling. I have a hard time understanding dragonfly migration and why, and I can't get my arms around it, but we think that there may be a link between food resources and just the ability to get another couple of weeks of life might be worth that long journey, and potentially another couple of weeks to mate with a female and pass your genes on to the next generation. Hard to know. But in New England, spectacular dragonfly migrations. And not just this species, but a few others tucked in. But by far and away, the common green darner is the most abundant traveler in our migrating swarms in the fall. I encourage you to take that trip to the coast in the fall and have a look for migrating dragonflies. So if you want to find dragonflies and damselflies, you got to go to water. And water of all different kinds is habitat. Freshwater primarily. I'm going to show you some pictures of the different habitat types. Oh, oops. Now, see, I have not in my career yet sunk up to my head in mud, but I have been in some pretty muddy places. This is just a potential peril of chasing dragons. Again, we don't have any quicksand that I know of in Rhode Island, but you can get into some deep mucking places. I surprised myself with that one too. So habitat preference in our odonates. Most of our dragonflies and damselflies prefer still water, ponds, lakes, bogs, marshes, and swamps. So 99 out of 139 Rhode Island odonates prefer still waters. 40 species prefer or are found exclusively in running water. And in both of those categories, there's a few species that inhabit those that may also be found in a different habitat type. So a few river species could also be found in ponds, and a few pond species may also be found in slow rivers. All right, so here's a look at some ponds, lakes and ponds, a major category of what we call lentic habitats, in other words, still waters or stagnant waters. That pond in the lower right is a place to go if you want to see large numbers of dragonflies. The ponds that are really weedy with lots of floating and emergent vegetation tend to have huge numbers of damsels and dragons in them. And a really good Rhode Island pond could have 50 or more species of odonates in it. Not all flying at the same time, because they do fly at different times of the year. There are spring species, summer species, and fall species. Okay, our rivers and streams. In Rhode Island, we don't have big rivers like the Connecticut River. Our largest river is the Blackstone River, and its lower reaches, which is where it's really big, are damaged and disturbed by dams and industry from the past several hundred years of history. And a few species live in swamps, and if you're going to live in a place that tends to have little water or temporary water, odonates have to be able to get out of the water. In other words, emerge from the larval stage before that water dries up. And then bogs and fens is similar. Temporary water, the larvae have to be able to emerge before the water dries up. One of the things in temporary waters that's beneficial to odonates to live there is that temporary waters do not have fish. And fish are major predators on odonate larvae of all kinds. And then there's a few species out of our 139 in Rhode Island, 4 prefer brackish marshes. Marshes and habitats with a little bit of salt in them. And that's a small but significant group of odonates that occur there. All right, let's go through and look at some of the characters that live in Rhode Island, odonates that live in Rhode Island. Here's some damselflies that are common on ponds. In the upper left is a bluet, and I mentioned that group because it is one of the largest damselfly groups. There's 20 species here, and most of them are blue and black on the abdomen. And those are species that you have to get in your hand or under a microscope to determine what species they are. So that's our familiar bluet, and then super common familiar bluet, super common eastern forktail. Really, these are really small, about 1 inch long. And then in the lower left is a member of the spreadwing family of damselflies, and you'll see how it's perched with its wings partially spread. It does not fold its wings up over its back like most damselflies do. And I wondered for years why that one particular family perched with its wings spread out. And finally, someone did a talk at a conference I attended, and they had actually timed the liftoff speeds of spread-wing damselflies, and they determined that spread-wing damselflies were able to lift off faster from the perch than other damselflies because they held their wings partly open. And you might ask, well, so what? Well, the reason is that these insects are chasing prey. And so it's beneficial to be able to get off your perch fast when a particular prey comes in range, or if you're being chased by something else, it's beneficial to be able to get up off your perch by either chased by another odonate or chased by a predator. So that was fascinating discovery. All right, so coastal plain ponds are special and unique ponds that in New England are most common in southeastern Massachusetts, so Cape Cod and Plymouth County. We have a few really good examples in Rhode Island. These are ponds that are glacial ponds, and They usually do not have an inlet or an outlet. They sit in kettles in chaotic terrain, and they're the result of what the debris that was dropped by retreating glaciers. In those glacial deposits were sand and gravel and huge boulders and ice blocks. And when all that stuff was deposited, the ice blocks were deposited as well. And when they melted, they filled up with groundwater. So in coastal plain ponds, the water levels fluctuate during the year and from year to year. And they tend to have interesting plants in them and some rare plants in them, and then a series of interesting damselflies and dragonflies as well. And in this slide, the two on the left, the scarlet bluet and pine barrens bluet, are threatened species, and they are New England endemic damselflies. In other words, they don't occur in other regions. And when I first started working on odonates, those two species were known from just 4 different states. Interestingly enough, the scarlet bluet in the upper left, one of our most beautiful damselflies, it's about 1 inch long. Interestingly enough, that species has now expanded its range. It used to be known from the northernmost sites were in Massachusetts. Now it is known from ponds north of the White Mountains and New Hampshire and into maritime Canada. That is the most extraordinary range expansion of any odonate that I've ever seen in my career. And this is a little pipsqueak of a damselfly. So how and why it made that change and that expansion is really interesting. And we can consider climate change as a reason for that potentially. The southern sprite here is a very rare damselfly in Rhode Island and in New England. It is our rarest damselfly. It is known from one pond in Rhode Island, and that pond is the only location in New England for this species. And so we are at the very northern limit of range for this damselfly. It's tiny. It's smaller than 1 inch. And we don't give away the location where it occurs because it is so rare. All right, a couple of pond dragonflies that you'll see around. We saw slaty skimmers earlier in my presentation, but the other 3 in this slide, they're all 4 are members of the skimmer family, which is our largest dragonfly family. And many of them have interesting patterns or recognizable patterns on their wings. You can see the common whitetail on the upper right. This is an interesting dragonfly, and lots of odonate people study it for its behavior. Unlike most dragonflies that perch on branches or on the ends of grass stems, this one typically, except for the one in the photo, perch on the ground. And then they charge up off the ground and chase other dragonflies away, other common whitetails away, and they mate with lots of females in the same period, and then they attempt to guard all of those females at once. So their behavior is so interesting that a lot of odonate folks like to study them. And then the lower left is the widow skimmer with the black and white marks on the wings, and the 12-spotted skimmer is the only dragonfly that we have that has black and white checkerboard pattern on the wing. And these are very active dragonflies. You can see them commonly at ponds, and I have records of some of these in every single town in Rhode Island. So they're really widespread, ubiquitous, and very abundant. And here's a couple of more really common pond dragonflies. In the lower left, the blue dasher. Notice how it's perched with its wings kind of folded down and forward. That was probably a hot day. And what it's doing is it's shading its thorax, because in the thorax are all kinds of things that could overheat if the sun got too hot on it. And then on the right is the eastern pond hawk. And the eastern pond hawk starts out as all green, like the color of a Granny Smith apple. And the males, once they're mature, they take on this powdery blue, really lovely, we call it pruinosity, but it kind of looks like a powder or dust all over it. By the way, the blue dasher is one dragonfly that really is tolerant of degradation and disturbance in the water where it lives. And in some of our most polluted ponds, it's the only species that occurs there. All right, so in the end of the summer, you'll see a lot of red dragonflies around. And this is those are our meadowhawks. We have 5 species here. They all emerged late in the summer, and they are the latest dragonflies to be out on the wing. Believe it or not, I have several records of meadowhawks from the middle of December in warm years, which is really a very late record for any odonate at all. All right, so these are the 747s of the insect world, and you've seen the 2 photos on the right of darners, and this is the darner family, and they are our largest dragonflies. And in the on the right hand side of your screen is the swamp darner. That's the one I found in the gourd, dead in the gourd of a purple martin. And they are, again, the largest dragonfly in North America. They too undertake migrations, and we have had some spectacular spring migration of these. And they're big enough where they get hit by cars and their bodies are all over the road when they're migrating. Very sad, but there's no way really for them to avoid vehicles as they are flying. You just most of the time can't perceive that vehicle before it strikes them. So again, the common green darner, the last thing millions of mosquitoes see in their life. We have a couple of southern species that occur just at the edge of the range here. This is the great blue skimmer. It is a skimmer, but it's the size of a darner, like the ones in the last family I showed you. It's enormous. And the very first one I ever found in Rhode Island, I found in Little Compton. And in 2004, we had a huge influx of this species from the south. And they were seen all over New England. We had them reproducing here in Rhode Island in that year in several locations. And the following year, when we returned to those ponds, some of those ponds still had them there. So we presume that at least for a year or maybe two, we had reproducing great blue skimmers in our neck of the woods. And then what happens is, their numbers decline and you don't see them that much anymore until, maybe 20 years later, and then poof, another huge wave of them comes back in. So very interesting, and it may have something to do with drying habitats in the south where their normal range is. But in 2004, we had lots of these around, and I haven't seen a year like that since. All right, so some dragonflies of coastal plain ponds. I want to show you this one because it's a member of the clubtail family, and these are mostly river species. The males have a swollen tip on their abdomen, hence the name clubtail. Their eyes are actually separated on the top of their head a little bit, more like a damselfly eyes. And many of these are sensitive to disturbance and pollution and runoff and siltation in river systems. This one is the common sand dragon, and here in Rhode Island, it's known only from lakes. And on the right, the photograph on the right, you can see the trails. These are trails made by the nymphs that they tunnel along in the sand underneath the water. And if you were to put your hand down right here, this is the end of a trail, you could reach into that sand and pull up a nymph of a common sand dragon. I took that photograph, by the way. It doesn't look like it looks like a beach, but I took that photograph through the surface of the water of a lake. So you can see how clean and clear that water is. And that's the kind of habitat that common sand dragons like, hence the name sand dragon. All right, so the golden winged skimmer is another of our very rare dragonflies. If you go a few miles, well, maybe more than a few years, if you go to southeastern Massachusetts, Plymouth and Barnstable County, these are actually quite common. We have just one location for them in Rhode Island, so they're very rare here. They're very rare in Connecticut. And this is a very wary dragonfly. It will perch, but it will not let you approach. And this is just an indication of how good its vision is. And I know because I've spent almost 40 years trying to get these guys in nets. The very first golden wing skimmer that turned up in a net in Rhode Island, it took 3 hours to get in the net. 3 hours to get in the net. That's extraordinary. All right, so this is a really cool migrant that we have, this wandering glider, and you can get a sense from its name what I'm going to tell you. It is a true globetrotter. This species has been found 500 miles at sea, not just one, but swarms of them, and an estimated nearly 1,000 miles from the nearest likely breeding site. They occur here in Rhode Island. Their numbers correlate nicely with the amount of rain we had. We had lots of rain in 2021, so we had lots of wandering gliders around. And this was a species that was seen after the hurricane passed in September on Block Island. And this is the one that I got calls about, thousands of dragonflies hovering over and flying over Block Island. And I was here in my house in Barrington, and I said, someone go catch one and take a picture. And they did. And it turned out that this was the species. So they also migrate along with our common green darners. They're generally not as abundant, but you can get spectacular numbers of wandering gliders as well. They like early successional ponds too, ponds with not a lot of vegetation, you'll find them in, and temporary waters. So their larvae can be quite short-lived. All right, let's look at some stream odinates that occur in lakes. On the left is the Illinois river cruiser. I put that one in, it's one of my favorite dragonflies. But it also is an indication of the great English names or common names that this insect group has. They have names like river cruisers and dragon hunters and shadow dragons. And on the right is our shadow dragon. And in other parts of New England and its range, it occurs in rivers. Here in Rhode Island, it's only known from large lakes and reservoirs. And it's called a shadow dragon because the only way to find it is to go out as the sun sets on a June or July night, and it flies for about 25 minutes as the sun is setting. They come out of the trees and they make reproductive flights low over the water. And then poof, they're gone for the night. And you're never going to see them again for another 24 hours. And we don't know where they spend the rest of the day and night. We think they may, of course, perch in trees and roost in trees. During the day, they may be feeding at such high altitudes that we just can't see them. And so that's our umber shadow dragon. Fascinating. You got to drive your car out somewhere at just as the sun is setting and see if you can see them flying out over the reservoirs and in large lakes. And we still just have a handful of records for this species here in Rhode Island. We haven't turned it up on any river yet. But what happens is that some lakes, especially the larger ones, the wind creates waves in highly oxygenated water, which kind of mimics the conditions in rivers and streams. So we'll move to rivers and streams now. As I said, Rhode Island doesn't have any big rivers, so we miss a lot of species that occur in other states that have really large rivers, but we still have some wonderful river faunas. On the left is the coppery emerald. It's a member of a family that's called emeralds, and all of them, except a few species, including this one, have bright, brilliant emerald green eyes. And this one does not. This is the coppery emerald. It's a southern species. It occurs here at the edge of its range, and it's known only from a few locations in the Northeast, most of them in Rhode Island. So people from the South, in the heart of this species range, where it's actually uncommon, they come here to see it because we can show them lots of them here. There's a lot of places in Rhode Island where we see them every year. Now here's some clubtails. Again, you can see the club on the end of the tail. And these two species, the brook snaketail and the zebra clubtail, are both threatened species in Rhode Island because they prefer clean streams, forested streams. The one in the lower right, the brook snaketail, the larvae of the brook snaketail prefer clean sand with no silt in it. And that's the only place where the larvae are found. So you've got to have a stream or river system that doesn't have siltation and pollution, that has clean sand deposits before you can find a brook snaketail. They're only known from 2 watersheds in Rhode Island. And until last year, they were only known from 1 watershed. All right, spike tails. You can see why they call these spike tails. These are some of my favorite dragonflies of streams. They're big. It's hard to, well, you can actually see the lower right, the size of that arrowhead spike tail compared to that person's hand. On the left-hand side is the female twin-spotted spiketail, and she's got this spike, a very rather dangerous-looking spike at the tip of her abdomen. That is not something to harm you with, but that is a scoop that allows her to deposit her eggs in the bottom sediments of rivers and streams. And what they do is the females get perpendicular to the water, kind of like a pogo stick, and they go up and down with that abdomen, jabbing it into the sediment on the bottom of the stream. They like shady streams and shallow and some relatively small streams, even intermittent streams that stop flowing during some parts of the years. And the larvae of these species require several years before they mature and emerge. A couple of damselflies of rivers and streams. We have one truly purple damselfly, and that's the variable dancer on the left. The dancer group, they call them dancers because when the males come to a perch, they clap their wings together. And I'm not sure why that is indicative of dancing, but I guess to whoever named it, it seemed like they were dancing. And then in the upper right is the American ruby spot. And that has those beautiful, as a mature males have these beautiful bright red spots at the base of their abdomen, almost as though someone took a paintbrush and painted those on, but they didn't. And these are species of rivers. So for the American ruby spot, we find them up and below dams, in the rushing water below dams. The ebony jewelwing is one of 3 jewelwing species that we have, and they all have black on their wings, and their bodies are iridescent green. This one, the ebony jewelwing, the males, their entire wing is black. And this species here, the sparkling jewelwing, just the tip is black, as though they've been dipped in ink. And this is the male. The females look a little bit different, but they still have that incredible iridescent metallic green color on their body. And some species of odonates, the males will display. They'll display to other males to say, to throw up a sign that says, don't come any closer because this is my place and these are my females. Or they may display to attract a female. And this is a sparkling jewelwing that is in the display posture. And you can see how he spread his wings. He spread his wings to show another damselfly that he's here. And that other damselfly is never going to miss that brilliant green abdomen pointed up in the air. All right, so brackish habitats, I mentioned them. We have 4 species, 3 of them are here, and I apologize for the photo of the Ramber's forktail, but I have that in because it's the rarest of the 4. It does occur in Little Compton in one place. We'd like to find it in more places. It does, the adults lay their eggs in pools of water or streams or ditches in the marshes and also in salt ponds. And I have some concerns about these species going forward with climate change because of sea level rise, especially in developed coastlines where these coastal habitats probably do not have a chance to roll landward as sea level rises and may actually be inundated and disappear entirely. So on the left, the seaside dragonlet is the most common of these brackish odonates. And this one is an immature male that you're seeing. The females and the immature males have those orange markings on the top of their abdomen. And once they're fully mature adults, that abdomen turns entirely black. And they perch on the mats of marsh grass in brackish marshes. And when you walk along, they'll flush them up and they'll fly about 10 or 12 feet and then they'll light again on the top of the marsh grasses. And they do lay their eggs in the pools.
Okay. I'll do it right now. Yeah, maybe she can come.
All right, I'm not sure what that's all about, but I'm going to move right ahead. I just want to tell you about the Rhode Island Odonata Atlas here. We'll do a brief summary. This was a multi-year inventory of Rhode Island that ran from 1998 through 2004. We continued to do surveys right up through the last recent years, but we ran some analysis on the data between 98 and 2004. So we have 139 species in Rhode Island, as I mentioned. 22 of those were new to Rhode Island during that Atlas period. So that was a major expansion of our fauna. And 2 of those were new to New England as well. So we surveyed all 5 counties, all 39 towns, 1,100 plus sites. And I think I had my toes in every single one of those sites during that period. It was wonderful. 396 lakes, ponds, reservoirs, and impoundment, and 281 stream sites, 64 fens, bogs, and swamps, and 51 coastal or brackish wetlands. So we covered a lot of ground. We, myself and 55 volunteers, collected over 12,000 voucher specimens and spent over 8,000 hours in the field and lab during this project. So it was really our most intensive survey of odonates in the last 30 or 40 years in Rhode Island. And it resulted in a lot of great results, as you can see there on the screen. And I just wanted to shout out to all the volunteers who contributed. Without the volunteers, we would not have been able to do this. Volunteers collected more than 70% of the voucher specimens and records for odonates during that Atlas period. They entered almost all of the Atlas records into the database. They discovered 14 of the 22 new species that were previously unreported for Rhode Island. And they located more than half of the new populations of state listed and rare species, and an estimated 8,000 hours of service in the field from that group. Really phenomenal effort. So what we did with our data, I was really curious as to what factors might be driving the number of species that we found in the different towns in Rhode Island. And so this map shows you in baskets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 baskets running from 0 to 25 to more than 100 species. It shows you where the towns are in terms of species richness. Species richness is simply a measure of the number of species that occur in a particular area. Areas with high species richness are more stable and more productive environments and are thus super important for conservation. And so I was interested in seeing where the richest areas were for our odonate fauna. You can see a couple things happening there. As you get away from the metropolitan area, you start seeing greens, light greens and dark greens on the map. And those are our highest numbers of odonate species in those towns. Those are also the places where there is the most forest and the least development. So what we found, the 2 factors that correlated with the species richness of odonates in Rhode Island, one was the percent of forest cover, and the other was the percent of development of roads. Now that's not rocket science, but maybe for aquatic insects, the importance of forest is a little bit surprising. We know forests have a profound effect on aquatic ecosystems. They protect the ecosystems from runoff and pollution, and they help to maintain water temperature. So a lot of species that live in those aquatic streams and rivers that prefer cooler water temperatures. Once you remove that forest cover, the sun gets in and the water temperature increases. So forests, super important, and development and roads as well. Just a little bit about development in in the Northeast, development is the largest threat to odonates and other aquatic invertebrates and many organisms, animals, and plants. And this is Rhode Island's only state endangered dragonfly. Even though it's endangered, we have 30 populations in Rhode Island, most of them in the Pawcatuck watershed. The reason we have so many, most of those, other than a handful, maybe 6, are super small populations, and many of them wink on and off over time. So they're not there every year. On the right-hand side is an air photo of a gravel mining operation. And this little fen right here was the habitat for our largest population of ring bog hunters anywhere. And this is what happened to the forest on the entire west, south, and north side of that wetland. All of the forest, all of the topsoil was removed, and the sand and gravel was mined and sold. And once you remove topsoil, you can't get it back. And so this has had devastating effects on not just the wetland, the quality of the wetland, but all the organisms and the species that live in that wetland. So let me just go through the threats pretty quickly for dragons and damsels. Development, as I said, is the largest one. Some of the breakdowns on that are forest loss. Again, I talked about the importance of forest for aquatic systems. Siltation and runoff and changes in water temperature. Climate change, if you'd asked me 40 years ago what the threats for odonates were, I probably wouldn't have put climate change at number 2. But we are already seeing the impacts of climate change on our odonate fauna and on their habitats. In things like changes in water temperature, the amount of water that's there, floods and droughts having all kinds of effects on the habitats. Extreme rainfall events that are causing dam breaks. When beaver dams break, the ponds behind them disappear and all the pond species disappear with them, even the rare ones. Recreation can have an effect, trampling of shoreline vegetation and bank destabilization. Also, the introduction of fish to fishless habitats. I mentioned that fish are significant predators of odonate larvae and even of adults. I've seen them, as I said, jump out of the water and catch adults over the water. Invasive species. There are no invasive odonates here, or really introduced odonates, but there are invasive plants in wetlands that can displace the native vegetation and thus affect the species that live there. And insecticide application. Many of the chemicals that are sprayed to control mosquitoes are also lethal to other aquatic species, including odonates and fish. But I don't like to finish on a negative note, so let's finish on a positive note. Again, the conservation organizations, we have an active and successful conservation community here in Rhode Island, and most states do now. And the only places that we have a chance to protect our odonate fauna in perpetuity and over the long term are the places that conservation organizations protect. So please continue the good work that you do, and all of you out there, get a membership to your local land trusts and the Audubon Society and the Nature Conservancy so that your dollars go to conservation. Larger conservation areas will capture more species. Bigger is always better, and we looked at some data that we had for protected landscapes, and we found that as the size of those landscapes went from 100 acres up to 13,000 acres, the number of odonate species increased dramatically. So enlarge existing small conservation areas and protect corridors between them for movement of animals. Maximize forest cover and minimize disturbance. I talked about the threats being disturbance and, of course, the loss of forest cover that I'm very concerned about. Enlarge the regulatory buffer around wetlands. Currently, our regulatory buffer is only 100 feet around wetlands, and we know that many species that live in these wetlands fly much further than 100 feet in their adult life. And we know that even emerging dragonflies will walk more than 100 feet to emerge. So 100 feet is just not going to cut it for protecting the landscapes around these aquatic habitats where these species breed. All right, minimize the impacts of recreation. Recreation in aquatic systems is great. I'm all for fishing. I love fish, but we have to be careful about creating access points and removing vegetation, allowing sun in, building bridges across systems, things like that, that can cause disturbances to the water below. And the other thing is the job's not done once we protect these habitats. That's a large part of it. That's the part that costs a lot of money, but ongoing is the stewardship and management of these sites. And so one of the first steps to do once you've protected a piece of land is to find out what lives there and what the needs of those species are, and then to manage those lands in an area that will, in a way that will benefit those wildlife species. All right, so I'm finishing on a positive note, and I have to credit my photographers. I am a scientist. I walk around ponds and lakes and rivers with a dragonfly net, and I haven't figured out yet in nearly 40 years how to collect accurately and study dragonflies accurately and take a good picture at the same time. So while I took some of these photographs, all these other folks did the good work that I was unable to do. So thanks to all my photographers. And I like to finish with this poem from Alfred Tennyson. Today I saw the dragonfly come from the wells where he did lie. An inner impulse rent the veil of his old husk. From head to tail came out clear plates of sapphire mail. He dried his wings like gauze they grew. Through crops and pastures wet with dew, a living flash of light he flew. So that is my final slide. I do want to show, I'm going to stop the share and I'll take questions. But I think before I do, I want to just show the book that was mentioned earlier that just was published in 2020. This is not a field guide. It's pretty big. So it's not something you're going to stick in your back pocket or in your bag as you're out in the field. And it's not an identification guide either. We do have color illustrations of almost all the species of odonates that occur in Rhode Island, of the males. And we do not have space to do the females. Otherwise, the book would have been twice as heavy and twice as long. But this is a compilation of the results from the Odonata Atlas and from more recent surveys that we've done of odonates, and all kind of rolled up in one. And it's an introduction to all the species that we have here, including their distribution in Rhode Island, their abundance, some notes on behavior. So if you want to take a deep dive into this group in a fun way, there is some science in this book, but you can be successful in identifying male odonates with this book. But bear in mind that some species and many species of damselflies you have to actually magnify even with a microscope before you can determine what species they are. So you can make some headway here and at least get to genus in pretty much every group and down to species in probably most of the dragonfly families. So with that, I want to thank you all, and I can take questions for however much time we have. I'm happy to answer questions, take comments, whatever.